Hi, I'm James Catherall, co-founder of Catherall Audio, and in my hands I have an SP404 MK2 hardware sampler. It has a strong following of beatmakers, especially in the lo-fi genre, but it has a home in another niche community, the marching arts. Mainstage has been gaining massive popularity in the activity, but there's still a solid few holding on tightly to the classic hardware sampler. This refresh is long overdue, with the last version being released in 2009. They kept it feeling familiar, but also had some great updates to make it more intuitive. Let's go over what's new. Starting with the outside. It's basically the same size as the original, just a little bit longer this way, so it should still fit in all the same spaces. It has a fresh, modern overall look while retaining a familiar layout. So if you're used to the original model, then you'll feel comfortable with this one as well. As you've probably already noticed, there are 4 additional sample pads. This means you can now have 16 samples per bank. They feel a lot more like drum pads now instead of buttons. They no longer travel when you press them, they just feel like a solid rubber block, so it's not really a button anymore. You'll also notice the pads have secondary functions. These are listed underneath them in white text and can be accessed by holding the shift button and tapping the pad. The number of banks have remained the same, and the layout still has many familiar buttons. The MK2 has the exact same 4 knobs on the top, the main output volume control still being on the far left with 3 other control knobs. The display, however, is a huge upgrade and can show much more information that will help navigate the parameters and functions of the device. On the side here is the SD card slot. One thing you'll want to be aware of is that this is an SDHC compatible drive, which means it maxes out at 32 gigabytes. If you get a card larger than that, it'll tell you that the card is not compatible. Moving on to the back, they've switched to 1/4" inputs and outputs. The original used RCA plugs, but now it should be a lot easier to have backup cables since you're much more likely to have 1/4" cables lying around than RCA cables in this activity. On the bottom here is an input for a guitar or a microphone, a gain knob, and headphone jacks. Now, as for updates to the actual performance, they've made it much easier to load in samples. Take an SD card and format it inside the MK2, then pop it into your computer and drop the WAV files into the import folder on the card. Once you've done that, you can put it back into the sampler. Next, hold the shift button and tap pad 14 to get to the import menu. You can select a single sample or hold shift and scroll down with the value knob to select multiple samples. Then tap the pad you want to load the sample onto and click the value knob. If you've selected multiple samples, it'll put the first sample you selected onto the pad you chose, and then put every subsequent sample onto the next pad in ascending order. You can also record in samples from your computer directly into the MK2 using the outputs at the top. Once you've recorded the sample, it is now easier than ever to edit start and end times. Tap the sample and press the start/end button, and the audio waveform will appear on the screen. You can use the value knob to zoom in and out, use the Control 1 knob to adjust the start position, and the Control 3 knob for the end position. When you're happy with where it's at, then you press the start/end button again, or just the exit button. Now this is non-destructive, so you can go back and change it at any time. Now here's a tip for you when creating your samples. I would suggest making them as loud as possible, or at least louder than you might think it needs to be. It's much easier to turn down the volume on a sample than it is to make it louder on this device. Also, when loading samples, you should play it through your Ensemble sound system to get an idea of any edits that may need to be made. Samples will always sound different depending on the sound system used, and certain frequencies can pop out and become problematic with your Ensemble's audio gear. The best practice is to have your laptop ready with your DAW of choice to make EQ edits before loading them into the sampler. Now let's talk about the capacity. It can hold 16 samples per bank with 10 banks for a total of 160 samples. The MK2 also has a larger category called a project. A project is the collection of all the samples on all the banks. You can have up to 16 projects on the device. So if you fill up all 160 samples, you can move to project 2, and this will open up all of the banks for 160 more samples. Switching between projects is quick and easy. Hold the shift button and press the sub pad button. Then tap one of the number pads to load that project. The loading time will depend on how many samples you have in the project, but it doesn't take more than a couple seconds. The only thing you'll have to be careful of is that it will stop any samples that are currently playing once you switch projects. The gate button is still here and serves the same function. If the button is lit up, then the sample will stop as soon as you release your finger. To turn it off, tap the sample pad and press the gate button. Now the sample will play from beginning to end every time you trigger it. There are lots of cool effects and other processing functions on this sampler, but specifically for the marching arts, I suggest dialing in any FX or EQ in your DAW of choice. The only thing I suggest altering in the sampler is the volume. One of the best changes, in my opinion, is how it handles changing the volume of the samples. Tap the sample you want to change and then press the pitch/speed button. On the right side of the screen is the current volume setting for that sample. You can use the Control 3 knob to change the volume of it. Be careful when turning the knob because the value will jump to wherever the knob is currently set. So if I have the volume set to 40, but the knob is all the way to the right, as soon as I touch it, the volume will jump up to 127. So you just want to make sure you take a quick mental note of where the volume is currently before you make any adjustments. Now, there are 4 areas that can change the volume of the samples being triggered. Number 1 is the main value knob at the top left. I suggest leaving this knob turned all the way up to the maximum value. Number 2 is the bank volume. You can access this by holding the shift button and pressing one of the bank buttons. This will show you the volume of that current bank. Number 3 is the pad velocity. You can hold the shift button and press 1 to eliminate any velocity volume changes. Number 4 is the method I talked about just a moment ago. It's best to leave the first 3 areas at their maximum value so you're only dealing with one parameter when changing the volume of a sample. Otherwise, you'll be hopping all over the menus of the device to check volumes during rehearsal. There are a couple more cool features on this device, like being able to protect samples from being deleted. Because once a sample is deleted, you can't get it back. Especially if it's something you recorded in, then it's gone for good. So this is great to prevent any of those accidents. To use this feature, select a bank, hold the shift button, and press copy. A confirmation message will appear. Select OK and press the value knob to confirm. This will prevent the samples from being deleted. Another cool feature is that you can link up to 4 pads together, so when you press one pad, it'll trigger all of them simultaneously. This can be useful if you have different sounds that you want to be able to balance individually. To link samples, hold the shift button and press pad 7. Use the value knob to select one of the 10 possible link groups. Then tap the sample pads you want to link together. If you want to stop a sample in the middle of playback, you can tap the exit button quickly 4 times to stop all the sounds. Or you can hold the exit button and tap a specific pad to stop its playback. Now this sampler has 32 voice polyphony, which means you can have up to 32 samples playing back simultaneously. If you go over that number, it'll begin cutting off the oldest sample that you triggered. So that covers the more common features you'll use on this device. There are many more features packed into this thing, and if you end up getting one, I highly recommend sitting down with the device and going through each page of the manual. You never know what awesome nuggets of information you might find for your specific projects. This device is a huge upgrade over its previous iterations. It won't make your samples sound better or have better quality, but it has a lot of improvements that make it much friendlier to deal with during rehearsals and performances. That's it for this video. Let us know what your favorite new feature is down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one.